I was halfway through grading my daughter's algebra test when I saw her Dolores Matthews standing at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed. Sunglasses pushed up into that helmet of hairsprayed blonde curls, staring like she caught me burying a body. "Afternoon, Dolores," I said, already regretting it. She ignored the greeting. "You know, Frederick, the HOA board has received concerns about your situation." "My situation?" I raised an eyebrow and gently closed the binder. My daughter, Kiara, was inside working on a science experiment. "We homeschool. Yes, but it's legal and, frankly, better than anything the district's been offering lately." Dolores stepped closer, heels clicking on the concrete. "A child should be in school, not locked inside all day. Some of us are worried." "Some of you," I said flatly. "Or just you?" She didn't answer directly. "We're a community, Frederick. We have standards. Children need supervision, routine socialization. I saw her out in the yard during school hours last Thursday." "That's not education." "She was learning about soil pH and testing different fertilizers," I said, trying to keep my tone even. "It's called hands-on learning," Dolores sniffed. "Well, I hope you're ready to explain that to the proper authorities." I stared at her. "What are you talking about?" But she only gave a vague wave and marched off, her cardigan flapping like a cape in the breeze. 2 days later, a knock came at my door at 9 a.m. I opened it to find a woman holding a badge that read Child Protective Services. "Good morning," she said cautiously. "I'm here following up on a report of potential educational neglect and possible emotional isolation of a child. Can I come in and speak with you?" I stepped aside, pulse thudding in my ears. "Sure, come on in. You'll want to meet Kiara." The social worker's name was Lisa. She was professional, polite, and clearly a little confused about being there. Within 10 minutes, Kiara had shown her the science project, her reading list, which had more titles than my college syllabus, and the lesson plan for the week. Lisa flipped through the binder I handed her, nodding as she scanned the curriculum. "This is very organized," she said. "Is this your handwriting?" "Yep, former engineer. I like structure." She looked up. "You're doing an excellent job, Mr. Adams." "Thank you," I said. "So why are we here?" Lisa sighed. "We got an anonymous report claiming the child was being kept indoors all day, not being schooled, and possibly experiencing emotional abuse due to isolation. But..." She glanced around my living room, full of charts, educational posters, and Kiara's artwork. "It doesn't match anything I'm seeing here." I folded my arms. "Let me guess, the report came in right after Dolores Matthews had her little HOA meltdown in front of my driveway." Lisa's expression shifted. "I can't confirm that." "You didn't have to." She practically threatened it. Lisa gathered her folder and stood. "Well, I'm going to close this case as unfounded, but before I go..." She paused. "I'm sorry. You clearly care about your daughter and her education. This was a waste of your time." "Not just mine," I said. "You got dragged into Dolores's little power trip too." Lisa gave a tight nod, then left. That night, I installed 2 new security cameras facing the front yard. Not because I was paranoid, because I knew this wasn't over. Dolores and her HOA cronies had crossed a line. And now, I was going to document everything. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee going cold in my hand, watching the live feed from the new security cameras on my laptop. Nothing unusual so far. Just the usual parade of joggers, dogs dragging their owners behind them, and the occasional delivery truck. But I wasn't watching for random foot traffic. I was watching for Dolores. Kiara sat across from me, sketching out designs for a DIY weather station she planned to build. She was humming to herself, completely unfazed by the CPS visit the day before. I wished I could say the same. At 10:45, I spotted her. Dolores strolled past our house slowly, eyes scanning every inch of the property like she was taking inventory. She paused by the mailbox, pulled something from her oversized purse, and tucked it into the slot. Then she glanced up directly at the camera, her lips tight, before turning on her heel and heading back the way she came. I stood up and walked out, yanking the mailbox open. A single sheet of paper sat inside no envelope. Typed in bold letters, warning. Continued violations of HOA bylaws will result in escalating action. Your residence is under observation. No name, no letterhead, just threats. I walked back inside, placed the paper next to my laptop, and hit save on the footage. They wanted to escalate. Fine. I could escalate too. Later that afternoon, I took a drive down to City Hall. I'd been meaning to do it anyway, but now I had a reason. At the zoning and permits office, I waited in line until a clerk in her 50s waved me over. "You need records?" she asked, flipping open her logbook. "HOA bylaws and charter for Willow Creek Estates," I said. "I want to see their original filings and any amendments." She gave me a look. "You're the third person this month asking for that HOA's paperwork." "Really?" she nodded. "Yeah, something about mismanagement." "People are getting fed up." I stayed quiet as she pulled files from a cabinet behind her. She laid them out on the counter. "Here's the original charter, articles of incorporation, and the most recent amendment filings. You can copy anything you need." I spent over an hour reading. And what I found was gold. According to the charter, Willow Creek Estates HOA had been legally incorporated 15 years ago. But a clause buried in the bylaws stated that the board must hold an open election every 3 years and publish the results publicly within 30 days. The last documented election on file? 8 years ago. No meeting minutes, no election announcements, nothing since. Not only that, but financial records were missing for the past 2 fiscal years. No reports, no audits, no expenditure breakdowns. I copied everything, loaded the files onto a thumb drive, and thanked the clerk. By the time I got home, Kiera was outside adjusting the solar panel on her weather station. I waved and ducked into my office. I drafted a letter formal, precise, and backed by the city records demanding a full accounting of the HOA's leadership structure, elections, and finances. I printed 3 copies. One for their mailbox, one for the city council, and one for my lawyer friend Marcus, who owed me a favor. I didn't have to wait long for a reaction. The next morning, a black SUV I didn't recognize pulled up in front of my house. A man in a trim blazer stepped out and walked up to the door with a clipboard. I opened it before he could knock. "Frederick Adams?" he asked. "That's me. Detective Rowland, Financial Crimes Division. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" I stepped aside. "Sure, come in." He scanned the living room quickly and sat at the edge of the couch without removing his jacket. "We received a packet of documentation from the city clerk's office regarding Willow Creek Estates HOA. Your name was attached as the requester. Is that correct?" I nodded. "Yes, they've been threatening residents and possibly violating state nonprofit governance laws." "I thought someone should look into it." He flipped through his folder. "Did you know that 2 members of the board listed on their incorporation documents haven't lived at their registered addresses in over 5 years? "No," I said, "but I'm not surprised." He pulled out a photo. "Recognize her?" It was Dolores, holding a gavel behind a folding table at what looked like a community meeting. "Yeah, that's Dolores Matthews. She's been running the HOA for as long as I've lived here. Claims she was elected," he made a note. "We've spoken to a few residents already. No one remembers voting. No one's seen financial disclosures, and there are allegations of redirected funds from HOA dues into private accounts." "Redirected?" I asked. "Misappropriation of funds," he clarified. "We're talking tens of thousands of dollars over several years." The weight of it landed hard. Dolores hadn't just been overstepping, she'd been embezzling. "What happens next?" I asked. "We're opening a formal investigation. In the meantime, if you receive any further contact from her or the HOA, document it, and if you feel threatened, call us." He stood to leave but paused at the door. "By the way, that CPS report, it's under review. The agency flagged it as potentially malicious." I raised an eyebrow. "False reports can be charged as misdemeanors or even felonies, depending on the damage done," he said. "They're taking it seriously." After he left, I sat in silence for a long moment. Then I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. "So," I said as soon as he picked up, "what exactly happens when an HOA has been operating without legal elections for nearly a decade and their president used HOA dues for personal expenses?" He laughed. "Depends on the state, but in ours, you're looking at civil suits, forced dissolution, and potentially criminal charges." "Why?" "Because I've got evidence of all three." He paused. "Let's meet. I want to see what you've got." That night, I attended the monthly HOA meeting for the first time in years. Not because I wanted to, but because I was ready. Dolores was already at the front, seated behind a plastic folding table with two other board members I didn't recognize. About 20 residents sat in the folding chairs facing them. I walked in quietly and took a seat in the back. She launched into the meeting with a stiff smile. "Welcome, everyone. Let's begin with old business. The landscaping contract has been point of order," I said loudly, heads turned. Dolores froze. "I have a formal motion," I continued, standing up and holding out a copy of the documents I'd printed. "To dissolve this current board on grounds of failure to follow election protocols, financial transparency, and violation of state HOA statutes." There was a stunned silence. Dolores's face went pale. "You can't just—" "Actually, he can," said a voice from the back. Detective Rowland stepped into the meeting room, flashing his badge. "We're conducting an investigation into financial misconduct and governance violations. As of now, I'm advising all board members to refrain from further activity until the matter is resolved." Gasps rippled through the crowd. One of the board members stood up and walked out without a word. The other followed. Dolores looked like she might faint. I turned to the room. "I propose we form an interim committee of residents to oversee basic operations until the investigation concludes. We can hold a real election after that." People started nodding. A few clapped. Dolores sat in stunned silence as her grip on the neighborhood unraveled. I didn't need her apology. Watching her authority evaporate in full view of the people she'd lorded over for years was enough. By the following week, the neighborhood felt like someone had cracked open a window that had been sealed shut for years. The air had shifted. People I barely knew before were now stopping by my driveway to ask how they could help. Some brought old newsletters they'd saved, pointing out inconsistencies. Others brought questions, like whether they could hold a community vote to install stop signs on the corners where kids liked to skateboard. For the first time since I moved in, it felt like Willow Creek belonged to the people who actually lived there, not just the ones who printed out meaningless warnings and played pretend with bylaws. But the real fallout hadn't even started. 2 days after the interrupted meeting, Marcus called. His voice was clipped, urgent. "You need to get down to the county courthouse. Now." They just unsealed the HOA's civil filings. "There's more going on than we thought." I pulled into downtown 20 minutes later, parked in the city lot, and found Marcus leaning against the wall outside the records office holding a manila folder that looked like it had been through a shredder and reassembled. He handed it to me without a word. Inside were scanned copies of wire transfers, several notarized letters, and a ledger that had been submitted as evidence in a quiet civil suit filed against the HOA almost 4 years ago. The case had been buried in procedural delays until now. A resident, a woman named Judith, had sued the board after they froze her access to the community pool and fined her for non-compliant landscaping. She claimed the board had retaliated after she refused to vote for a dues increase. Marcus pointed to the bottom of the ledger. "See that? Those account numbers don't belong to the HOA, they trace back to a private trust. And here's the kicker, the trust was registered under a shell company tied to Dolores's nephew, out of state." I stared at the page, stunned. "They were laundering HOA dues?" Marcus nodded. "They moved nearly $72,000 over a 5-year period, and the trust has been liquidating assets for the past 6 months, probably gearing up to disappear." I looked up at him. "Did the police know?" "They do now," he said. "I sent a packet to the DA's office this morning. They've opened a criminal investigation, and it gets worse." He motioned for me to follow him into the building. Inside, we were led to a back office where a clerk handed Marcus a sealed envelope marked confidential. He opened it and pulled out a printed transcript of a deposition. This came in from a whistleblower, former board member. She moved out 2 years ago. Claimed she left because she was pressured by Dolores to fabricate complaints against homeowners who fell behind on dues. In exchange, Dolores would waive their late fees if they agreed to vote with her at meetings. I flipped through the transcript. The whistleblower described meetings where no minutes were taken, decisions made in private, and forged signatures on ballots. She'd refused to participate in most of it, but she'd kept copies of everything she was given, including a scanned document showing my name on a disciplinary list with the note, "Homeschooler non-compliant, use social services if needed." My stomach turned. She planned it, I said. She told them to call CPS. Marcus folded his arms. A few of them pushed back, most didn't, but this proves it wasn't just a complaint, it was part of a coordinated tactic. I clenched my jaw. She tried to use the law as a weapon against my kid. Marcus leaned forward. Now the law's coming for her. Over the next several days, the neighborhood buzzed with rumors. A few residents received subpoenas. I got a call from the district attorney's office requesting a formal statement. When I arrived, I was led into a conference room where 2 investigators were seated with laptops and legal pads. The lead investigator, a tall woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense tone, gestured for me to sit. "Mr. Adams, we've reviewed the documents you submitted and matched them with banking records obtained through a court order. We'd like to ask you some questions about your interactions with Miss Matthews and the HOA." I nodded. "Whatever you need." They asked about timelines, specific dates, whether I'd seen anyone else involved directly. I explained the CPS visit, Dolores's behavior the day before, and how the cameras caught her delivering the anonymous threat. The second investigator, a younger man with a slight accent, tapped his pen against his notebook. "We believe the HOA board committed multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy to defraud homeowners, and criminal harassment through misuse of municipal services. If the CPS report is proven to be knowingly false and retaliatory, that's another charge." "Good," I said. "She doesn't get to walk away from this." The lead investigator gave me a slight nod. "We're pursuing it, and we'd appreciate your continued cooperation." That night, Kiara and I unpacked the last box of books we'd been meaning to shelve in the spare room. She found an old photo of her and her mom at a science fair and pinned it to the corkboard. I watched her for a moment, how focused she was, how much she'd grown without me even noticing it. "Hey," I said gently, "you know none of this was ever your fault, right?" She turned, puzzled. "I know." "Why would it be?" I smiled, relieved. "Just checking." The next morning, the local news van showed up. They parked across the street and began filming while neighbors peeked out from behind curtains. A reporter in a navy blazer stood beside the sidewalk holding a microphone. "At the center of the developing HOA embezzlement case is longtime board president Dolores Matthews," she said, camera rolling. "Allegations include financial misconduct, election fraud, and abuse of authority. Residents say they've feared speaking out for years until now." Dolores's house was quiet, curtains drawn, no movement. But an hour later, a county sheriff's cruiser pulled up and 2 plainclothes officers walked to the door. One knocked while the other ready to fold her. The door opened slowly. Dolores appeared, no makeup, her cardigan wrinkled, a shadow of the person who once paraded around handing out citations for grass length. The officer handed her a document. She didn't argue, just nodded, then stepped back inside. Moments later, they emerged again, this time with her carrying a small leather bag, escorted to the cruiser's back seat. No handcuffs. But the message was clear. The news crew caught the entire thing. By evening, an emergency meeting was called at the community center. This time, it wasn't run by the HOA, it was led by residents. Chairs were filled. People stood along the walls. An older man named Bill volunteered to moderate, and the first motion was simple: dissolve the current HOA board and petition the city to appoint a temporary oversight committee. The vote was unanimous. For the first time, real voices were heard. People brought up concerns that had been ignored for years: the broken tennis court lights, the mysterious maintenance fees that never led to repairs, the missing community event fund. A woman named Carla, a retired CPA, volunteered to audit the books once they were released. Another resident, a former city planner, offered to help draft new bylaws. The community was rebuilding itself from the ground up. I stood at the back, arms folded, watching it unfold. Kiara tugged on my sleeve. "Dad," yeah, she held up a flyer someone had handed her. "They're starting a garden club. Can I join?" I grinned. "Absolutely." The woman who tried to use bureaucracy and fear to isolate us had ended up exposing her own corruption to the entire town. And the best part? She'd done it to herself. All I'd done was shine a light. Tomorrow I'd meet again with the investigators. There was more evidence to hand over, more statements to give. But for tonight, I was content to sit back and let the neighborhood do what it had never been allowed to before: take care of its own. The sun was still rising when I opened the mailbox and found a letter from the county clerk. Inside was confirmation that the HOA's nonprofit status had been suspended pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. That meant no more fines, no more secret meetings, and no more fake authority. I slid the letter into a folder already thick with documents and walked back to the house where Kiara was finishing breakfast, half listening to a podcast about weather balloons. She didn't ask about the letter, and I didn't bring it up. She had been through enough. Later that day, I set up a folding table in the front yard with a jug of lemonade and a stack of freshly printed flyers. The sign read, "Neighborhood Open Forum, let's rebuild this place together." I didn't expect a crowd. But within an hour, people began trickling in, some out of curiosity. Others with years of pent-up frustration finally ready to breathe. An older couple brought a hand-drawn map of the common areas, pointing out where benches used to be before the HOA had them removed for insurance reasons. A teenage girl asked if we could turn the abandoned fountain in the park into a community mural. A male carrier off duty that day passed by and dropped off a padded envelope with documents anonymously donated by a former board member, handwritten notes, some of them in Dolores's unmistakable cursive. One note stood out: CPS threat might scare him into leaving no precedent in the bylaws for homeschoolers, could be a gray area worth exploiting. I handed it off to Marcus, who had just arrived from the courthouse. "They were banking on ambiguity," he said, scanning the page. "That's the kind of thing that turns a civil case into a criminal one. There's intent here." "Think it's enough to get the DA to push harassment charges?" I asked. "They're already considering it." But this helps. We were interrupted by a woman approaching the table, shoulders square, expression unreadable. She wore a subtle blouse, pressed slacks, and carried a manila folder tucked under one arm. I recognized her from the disrupted HOA meeting, though I hadn't caught her name then. "I'm Rachel. I used to be the HOA's secretary about 6 years ago," she said. "I quit when I realized Dolores was rewriting board minutes after the meetings." She laid the folder on the table and opened it to reveal scanned receipts, board communications, and a series of meeting agendas, all with handwritten annotations showing what was actually said versus what Dolores had claimed in the official minutes. "She used to make us sign off on minutes we hadn't even seen yet," Rachel continued. "When I refused, she said I'd be relieved of my duties. Next thing I knew, my lawn was non-compliant. Rachel handed me a flash drive. Everything's backed up here." "I've already sent a copy to the DA," I nodded. "You're doing the right thing, thank you." Rachel hesitated. "She threatened to call CPS on my sister too, said her kids were playing unsupervised in the cul-de-sac, even though she was standing 5 feet away. I didn't say anything then." "I should have." "You're saying something now," I said. By the end of the day, over 30 neighbors had stopped by. Some offered to help with landscaping, others to teach weekend art classes for the kids. No titles, no hierarchy. Just people, finally free to care about where they lived without being bullied for it. That evening, Marcus called again. The DAs filed charges: fraud, misuse of public services, conspiracy to intimidate. And they're adding witness tampering now that we've got those altered minutes. What about the CPS report? Felony count of filing a false report with malicious intent. The social worker has already agreed to testify. I stepped outside and looked down the street. Dolores's house was dark. A single window lit in the back, all the curtains drawn. No sign of her since the day she was escorted to the cruiser. Think she'll see jail time? I asked. If not prison, definitely a hefty sentence and fines. The financial mismanagement alone is enough to bury her. She might try to negotiate a deal, but it won't be a gentle one. The next morning, a formal letter arrived from the Department of Children and Families, signed by Lisa, the same social worker who had visited weeks before. It was an apology, official and detailed, acknowledging what she now knew. The report against me had been completely fabricated and filed out of malice. Lisa wrote that an internal review had been completed, and that due to my cooperation and the quality of Kiara's educational environment, the department was implementing new procedures to flag potential weaponization of the reporting system. She even included a direct line for a liaison in case anything like this ever happened again. I didn't expect to feel anything when I read it, but I did. Relief, yes, but also something deeper. Vindication. Around noon, someone knocked on the door. I opened it to find a woman holding a large envelope from the county court. "Mr. Adams," she said, "you've been named as a key witness in the upcoming proceedings against Willow Creek Estates HOA. The state would like your help in presenting the case to the Oversight Committee for Community Restitution." "Restitution?" I asked. "There's talk of requiring the board to repay misused funds to the community. Possibly fund actual improvements under city supervision." I signed the paperwork and thanked her. By the end of the week, the city installed a temporary oversight administrator to handle HOA-related matters. A woman named Denise, with experience cleaning up corrupt housing boards, was introduced at a community meeting in the park. She didn't use a microphone, just spoke clearly and directly. "My role here is simple," she said. "Transparency, restoration, and making sure no one ever abuses their position in this neighborhood again." The crowd applauded. Not the kind of rehearsed clapping from Dolores's old gatherings, but real applause, the kind that meant people believed her. After the meeting, Denise approached me. "You're Frederick, right?" she asked. "That's me. I've reviewed your documentation. You set the foundation for this whole case. We're recommending you for the advisory committee." "I'm not much for committees," I said. She smiled. "You don't have to be. Just keep doing what you're doing." That night, Kiara and I sat in the backyard watching the weather station she'd built send data to her tablet. She adjusted a sensor and grinned as the numbers updated. "Did you know humidity changes faster after sunset?" she asked. "I do now," I said. She looked at me, eyes serious. "Are we safe now?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes." And for the first time in months, I truly believed it. A few days later, Rachel organized a block party not sanctioned by any HOA but approved by the city with the help of the new oversight office. Tables lined the cul-de-sac. Kids chased each other with chalk-stained hands, and someone set up a projector to play old cartoons on the side of their garage. Dolores's house remained dark. At one point, Lisa, the social worker, showed up with a tray of cookies and sat beside me under a pop-up canopy. "I wanted to say this in person," she said. "I've seen a lot of bad situations. Your home wasn't one of them. It never should have been flagged." "You were just doing your job," I said. She looked down for a moment. "Still, I should have trusted my instincts sooner." "You did," I said. "Eventually, that's what matters." She nodded, then glanced at Kiara, who was laughing with a group of kids by the makeshift mural wall. "She's doing well," She always was. As the sun dipped below the rooftops, someone lit a string of lanterns overhead. The light danced across faces once dulled by fear. Now there was music, laughter. People who had once avoided eye contact now traded stories and recipes. The HOA was gone. Not just the board, but the fear that had hung over every fence post and front porch. Replaced by something real. Something earned. And in the middle of it all stood a girl with chalk on her shoes, watching clouds roll in as her weather sensors blinked in the dark.